We would like to say a few words to the person who is with Madeleine or has been with Madeleine. Madeleine is a beautiful, bright, funny and caring little girl. She is so special. Please, please do not hurt her. Please don't scare her. Please tell us where to find her, or put her in a place of safety and let somebody know where she is. We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
Kate McCann ran, barefoot, breathless, back to the tapas restaurant and shouted what would become the most dissected sentence in modern true crime. Someone's taken her. Not, she's gone. Not, I can't find her. Taken. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a verdict. Just minutes earlier, she had left her table to check on her children, asleep in apartment 5A, only 50 meters away. When she entered, she said the bedroom door was ajar, the window wide open, the curtain blowing, and McCann's bed empty. She didn't search the closets. She didn't open the bathroom door. She turned around and ran. 2 toddlers slept undisturbed. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, no sound. But Kate's words were immediate, confident, and final. From that moment, the case was never just about a missing child. It became a study of a mother's reaction. Why did she say someone took her before anyone saw evidence? Why didn't she cry? Why was she so certain, so fast? It's not just what is said that matters, it's when it's said, and how. And Kate McCann's first words still echo louder than anything the investigation ever proved. 3 days after her daughter vanished, Kate McCann stepped in front of the cameras. Pale, still, holding her daughter's soft toy so tight the fabric curled in her fists. She looked straight into the lens and said, "Please don't hurt her. Please don't hurt our little girl." It was quiet. No sobbing, no breaking voice. Just the words one by one, delivered in a tone that didn't rise or fall. It was the first time most of the public had seen her, and it would be the last time many saw her the same way again. The plea was played on every news channel across Europe that night. Anchors called it heartbreaking. Reporters described it as brave. But for the people watching, truly watching, something didn't sit right. It was the stillness, the way she barely blinked, the grip on the soft toy that never loosened, the way her shoulders didn't shake, the voice that sounded too controlled, too clean. She didn't cry. In her early interviews with Sky News and Portuguese television, Kate sat beside Jerry, her posture slightly folded, her eyes blank. Her exhaustion was clear. She looked like someone who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. But she didn't unravel. Not on camera. Not once. Every word she spoke seemed weighed before leaving her lips. There were no mistakes, no rambling, no rushes of emotion. Just quiet sentences that ended in silence. She said McCann was loved, that they believed she was still alive, that they would not stop searching. It was everything a mother should say. But something in how she said it started to feel off to the audience. By May 5th, Kate's face was everywhere. Photos of her holding Cuddle Cat. Photos of her in sunglasses walking to the church. Photos of her in loose clothing, head lowered, lips tight. The press praised her restraint, her grace. Headlines in the UK described her as strong and composed under unimaginable pressure. Some outlets compared her to stoic public figures, to mothers who had turned grief into action. But while the media was still building her up, a different reaction was taking shape in living rooms, internet forums, and early comment sections. Viewers didn't feel what they thought they were supposed to feel. They leaned toward the screen, watching the clips again, uneasy. They noticed her hands didn't tremble, that her voice never cracked, that she kept speaking in the same low, flat cadence, no matter the question. It wasn't what she said that unsettled them, it was what was missing. Where were the tears, the emotion, the loss? Some defended her. Trauma is strange, they said. People freeze. People go numb, especially doctors, like Kate. She was trained to stay calm in emergencies. But others weren't convinced. They began to rewind the footage, frame by frame. They watched her eyes, the tightness of her jaw, The way she rubbed her thumb along the toy's ear. They said her sadness looked too quiet, too inward, too deliberate. And then there was the matter of her words. In one interview, she said McCann had asked the day before, "Why didn't you come when Sean and I were crying last night?" It was a devastating sentence. One that should have hit like a hammer. But it wasn't mentioned in any of the original police statements. It came later. On camera. And it changed the way some people heard everything else she said. That line was the kind of detail that stuck in people's heads, and they questioned its timing. Was it real? Or was it introduced to support the idea of an intruder returning? The online reaction grew. Quiet at first. Then louder. She's too calm. She's acting. No real mother would behave like that. The phrase repeated across forums, beneath news articles, between strangers. No real mother. It didn't matter that grief has no single form. It didn't matter that she may have been following professional advice to stay composed, to avoid appearing vulnerable to whoever might have taken her child. In the eyes of the public, she wasn't grieving the right way. And in cases like this, perception is everything. Kate's lack of visible emotion became its own storyline. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't searching. She wasn't breaking down on live television. She was talking, calmly, always calmly. And in the vacuum left by the lack of suspects, lack of evidence, lack of answers, that calm began to sound louder than anything else. What began as sympathy began to twist. They said she was too neat, that her clothes were too coordinated, that her hair was too brushed, that she didn't collapse, that she looked too composed in photos. They scrutinized her posture, her hand movements, the angle of her face. In the beginning, people had been looking for McCann. Now, they were watching Kate. The difference was subtle, but devastating. Because once doubt enters the room, it doesn't need proof to grow. It just needs a feeling. And the feeling, for many, was that something about Kate McCann wasn't right. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't prove it. But they could feel it. And in the world of public opinion, sometimes that's enough. On September 7, 2007, 4 months after McCann's disappearance, Kate McCann walked into the Policia Judiciaria headquarters in Portimao, no longer as a grieving mother, but as a formal suspect, and arguta under Portuguese law. The shift was not just procedural. It was psychological. What had started as a missing child investigation had slowly turned inward. Now, the mother herself was being questioned under suspicion. For 11 hours, she sat in the interrogation room. The questions began gently. What time did you leave for dinner? When did you check on the children? What did you see when you entered the room? But the tone shifted quickly. Investigators challenged her early statements. They pointed to inconsistencies. Why had she said the shutter was forced when no damage was found? Why had she assumed immediately that McCann had been taken, without searching the apartment? Then came the direct accusation. Did you kill your daughter? Her reply, silence. Throughout the session, Kate refused to answer 48 of the 49 questions posed. Only one question received a verbal response. She confirmed her lawyer had advised her not to respond. It was within her legal rights. But to police, and increasingly to the public, it felt like something else entirely. It wasn't just silence. It was avoidance. Investigators saw her restraint not as protection, but as control. The composure that once earned public sympathy now cast a long shadow. And as the official interrogation drew to a close, suspicion had fully shifted. From what had happened in apartment 5A, to what might be hidden behind Kate McCann's silence. The physical details of the scene, once overlooked, now became crucial. Kate had insisted from the beginning that the bedroom window had been open, the curtain blowing, the shutter forced. These elements were not minor. They were the backbone of her account. If they collapsed, so did the narrative. Forensic teams combed every inch of the apartment. The window pane was examined for prints. The shutter was checked for tool marks. The curtain was inspected for traces of struggle. But the findings told a quieter story. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints beyond Kate's on the window, no debris, No scuff marks, no dirt on the ledge. The shutter, police concluded, could only be opened from the inside. This detail struck hard against Kate's early statement. She had said the window was wide open when she entered, that the shutter had been jemmied, but the evidence contradicted her. Investigators believed it was more likely someone inside the apartment had opened it deliberately, to create a scene, to stage a break-in. In isolation, the inconsistency might seem small, but when layered with her refusal to answer questions, it became something larger. It became motive. The curtain, too, raised questions. In early accounts, it was described as blowing, then billowing. The language shifted. The imagery was vivid, but unverified. There were no witnesses, no photo of the scene at the exact moment, just descriptions. And those descriptions began to feel, to some, less like memory and more like choreography. In late July, weeks before Kate's formal interrogation, British sniffer dogs were brought into the case. One trained to detect the scent of human blood, the other, the scent of cadavers. They searched apartment 5A and the vehicles used by the McCanns. What they found would shape the investigation's next turn. Both dogs alerted in the McCanns' holiday apartment. The cadaver dog signaled behind the sofa in the living room. The blood dog confirmed traces in the same spot. More troubling, the same alerts were triggered in the Renault Scenic the couple had rented nearly a month after McCann vanished. In the trunk, and on items inside, reportedly including McCann's soft toy, the dogs reacted again. For Portuguese police, this wasn't just coincidence. It was a pattern. They believed the apartment was the site of death, and the car, hired 25 days later, had transported the body. But the science behind the alerts was disputed. No DNA match could be confirmed. The presence of scent, while significant, was not proof. Still, it added pressure. And pressure, in any interrogation, is currency. Investigators pushed harder. Why had Kate's behavior been so precise? Why had she claimed a break in that didn't exist? And now, with the dog's reactions, the weight of those early statements grew heavier. According to multiple reports, Portuguese investigators considered offering Kate a deal. If she admitted McCann had died in the apartment, accidental or otherwise, and that she had hidden the body out of panic, they would reduce the charges. Manslaughter, negligence, something less than murder, something that would allow the story to end. But Kate refused. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She denied involvement. Repeatedly. Her silence during interrogation wasn't because she was preparing to confess. It was because she wouldn't. No matter the offer. No matter the pressure. Jerry, too, stood firm. The McCanns said there was no deal, no death, no deception. That McCann had been abducted. That they were being scapegoated for a failed investigation. But investigators saw their refusal not as innocence, but as defiance. For police, a guilty person refusing a plea deal meant confidence in deception. For supporters, it meant truth. The line between the two blurred. And once again, perception filled the gaps where evidence could not. The refusal to confess did not clear suspicion. It hardened it. And in the minds of many, Kate's denial, when paired with silence, didn't feel like truth. It felt like something rehearsed. It is, even now, the question that haunts the case. Not where McCann went, not who took her. But why Kate McCann, a mother who claimed innocence, sat across from investigators and chose not to speak. Not to clarify, not to defend, not to weep. In public she was articulate, poised, direct. On camera she made appeals. She told stories. She spoke of dreams, of hope. But behind closed doors, when given the chance to explain the inconsistencies, to walk police through her own words, she shut down, completely. Was it fear? Was it strategy? Was it legal protection? Or was it something else? Silence, in the world of investigation, is a tactic. It can shield. But it also invites. It invites interpretation. It invites projection. And in the absence of fact, projection is power. Kate's silence did not break her. It defined her. It became the frame around every photograph, every quote, every appearance. To some, it was dignity under duress. To others, it was the hallmark of control, of concealment. A mother who had nothing to hide, they argued, would have fought harder. would have spoken, would have shouted. But Kate McCann did none of those things. She chose silence. And in doing so, she gave the world permission to wonder, not just what happened to her daughter, but what happened behind her eyes the night she disappeared. 1 year after Madeleine vanished, Kate McCann stepped out of silence and into authorship. She published Madeleine, a 384-page account of the tragedy, her emotions, and her enduring belief that her daughter was still alive. But the book was more than just a memoir. It was a campaign. Accompanied by a fresh wave of media appearances and a renewed search appeal, the McCanns launched a well-coordinated effort to regain public sympathy, raise funds, and control the narrative. The book was detailed, emotional, and firm in its message. This was the story of a mother wrongfully accused, determined to find her child. Posters were reprinted. Progressed images of Madeleine were released. Kate spoke with sharper clarity. The image was no longer that of a broken mother. It was of a spokesperson, a fighter, a strategist. And that shift, for many, felt jarring. What some saw as strength, others saw as performance. The book brought her back into the spotlight, but it didn't bring consensus. Instead, it drew a line between those who believed this was her reclaiming power and those who saw it as rehearsed redemption. Kate had taken control of the message. But for critics, that was exactly the problem. In a widely circulated 2008 interview with The Sun, Kate McCann invoked a chilling name, Elizabeth Fritzl. Fritzl had been imprisoned for 24 years by her father, locked in a basement, presumed dead, and found alive. Kate's reference was intentional. If Elizabeth survived all that time, she said, then there's still hope for Madeleine. It was a powerful statement, perhaps too powerful. To some, it served as a beacon of hope. If one woman could endure decades of captivity, then Madeleine, vanished without a trace, might still be alive somewhere. But others bristled. The comparison felt manipulative. Fritzl's case was gruesome, unique, and specific. To connect it to Madeleine, with no evidence of similar circumstances, struck many as emotionally charged theater. It wasn't the first time Kate's language had unnerved the public, but this time, the unease was sharper. The interview reached millions. The quote became a headline. And behind every share and comment, the same question lingered: was this the voice of hope or strategy? Even supporters found the choice strange. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't quite right either. And in a story so starved for truth, anything that sounded off became fuel for suspicion. That same year, Portuguese authorities officially lifted Kate and Gerry McCann's orgulho status. Legally, they were no longer suspects. The case was shelved. There was no evidence, no body, no DNA, no confession. The investigation had run out of leads. On paper, the couple was cleared. But in the public mind, the ink never dried. The questions hadn't gone away. They just changed form. If they were innocent, why had Kate refused to answer 48 questions during her interrogation? Why had she claimed a break in when the window showed no signs of tampering? Why did the story feel off? The answers were legal. The silence was strategic. But to many, it didn't sit right. Forums exploded. Blogs dissected the newly released case files. Every sentence in Madeleine was parsed for contradiction. Every media appearance was analyzed frame by frame. The law had spoken. But the court of public opinion wasn't finished. In fact, it had only just begun. Kate McCann had cleared a legal hurdle. But in the eyes of many, she remained the woman who said nothing when it mattered most. The internet responded to Kate's reemergence with a split personality. To one side, she was a resilient mother who refused to be silenced. Wronged, vilified, but unbroken. To the other, she was a constructed persona, coached, polished, too smooth to trust. Her interviews were clipped and clean, her wardrobe carefully chosen. Her eyes sometimes teary, sometimes distant. Supporters saw discipline. Detractors saw calculation. Every gesture was a new point of analysis. The way she held Cuddle Cat. The phrasing she reused. The pauses that felt too precise. Her critics didn't need a smoking gun. They had intuition. A real mother would fall apart. They said, she's standing too straight. The debate played out in comment sections, blog wars, and video breakdowns. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She had become a symbol of strength or of deception, depending on who you asked. Her book didn't settle the case. It fractured it further. Kate McCann had stepped into the light to tell her truth. But the more she spoke, the more divided the world became. Some heard pain. Others heard a script. And in the noise, one thing became clear: the story wasn't done with her yet.
She was very happy, and very loving, and I know Madeleine was very happy with her life. Special.
The pain of the past 6 months becomes ever harder to conceal. Still, Kate and Gerry McCann are able to find hope deep down for their daughter.
People know something if they can, search the heart, really. Somebody knows something, and they might not realise it, they might just suspect something. But everybody can make a difference to this. It's not about us, we miss her like crazy, but this is Madeleine, this is a 4-year-old girl. We haven't even seen her since she's been 4. Madeleine's there and she needs our help. She needs to be with her family,
The hole left in the family by Madeleine's disappearance is clearly being felt by the 4-year-old's brother and sister too.
They do ask about Madeleine, and Madeleine was very much a big part of their life. And they ask where she is. They're not upset, they're not distressed, but they're obviously very aware that she's not there, especially being home. And I guess it's hard for us as parents to imagine the fun they'd be having together, the 3 of them, if Madeleine was there.
The question whether they felt they'd be cleared of any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance brought an uncompromising response.
We know the truth. I know I'm innocent, Gerry knows he's innocent, we know each other are innocent. And that to me, it was actually quite calming, because I thought, we're innocent, we're totally innocent, and we know that. And
I think as well that you've got to remember it was over 4 months since Madeleine disappeared, and nothing that's happened to us in this time to upsetting us the way we felt when we discovered Madeleine missing.
On allegations the couple had sedated their children the night Madeleine disappeared, Kate McCann refused to be drawn.
I'm not even going to answer that question, I'm afraid.
It's ludicrous, and these sort of questions and the publishing of them are nonsense, and we shouldn't be giving them the time of day. There is absolutely no suggestion that Madeleine or children were drugged, and outrage.
I feel...
In May 2009, 2 years after her daughter vanished, Kate McCann made her first televised appearance in the United States. The stage was Oprah Winfrey's. It was not just another interview. It was the most watched talk show in America, and for many, the emotional court of global opinion. Kate arrived with Gerry, quiet but poised, prepared for an audience who had never seen her beyond newsreels and headlines. She spoke gently, deliberately, recounting the guilt that gnawed at her daily. "I feel responsible," she said. "I left her." Her voice never rose. Her hands rarely moved. And when Oprah pressed her, asked what it felt like to be at the center of the world's grief, Kate didn't cry. She looked down, blinked slowly. It was a moment heavy with contradiction, a mother describing emotional devastation, but doing so without any visible collapse. To American audiences accustomed to breakdowns on daytime television, it felt distant, too controlled. Oprah gave her space. She didn't push. But the silence between questions was telling. Kate's pain was there, at least in words. But was it enough? And once again, as with every time Kate spoke, people were less divided over what she said than over how she said it. The most haunting moment of the Oprah broadcast came when producers revealed a digitally aged image of Madeleine, what she might look like at 6 years old. The picture showed a healthy, bright-eyed girl with wavy hair and a soft smile. Kate stared at it, motionless, her jaw clenched, her eyes widened, but only slightly. No tears, no audible gasp, just a long, silent stare. Gerry reached for her hand and Kate nodded slowly, almost mechanically. The camera lingered. Oprah said nothing. The room went quiet. Viewers felt the pause hang in the air like a held breath. It was meant to be the emotional peak of the interview, the moment when reality and hope collided. But again, something didn't land. Kate's reaction was subtle, too subtle for some. In true crime forums, screenshots of her expression circulated almost immediately. "Look at her eyes," some wrote. "She looks like she's seen a ghost." Others said the opposite. "She looks rehearsed." That's not grief. That's calculation. The image of the child wasn't what sparked emotion. It was Kate's lack of it that did. For a moment, time froze. And in that stillness, suspicion crept back in. To deepen the broadcast's impact, OPRAH's team invited a non-verbal communication expert to analyze Kate's body language during the interview. The expert noted several key features. Kate's voice remained low and steady throughout, even when discussing deeply painful memories. Her gaze often drifted, not into the camera, but off-center, unfocused. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, barely moving. The expert interpreted these behaviors as signs of suppression. Someone deliberately controlling their emotions to avoid a breakdown. "This is not a woman devoid of emotion," he said. "It's a woman containing it." Yet other analysts weren't so sure. They noted a lack of micro-expressions. Those involuntary flashes of emotion most people can't suppress. They pointed out the consistency of her tone, the stiffness of her posture, the tightness of her lips. To them, it didn't suggest strength. It suggested a script. Kate was, once again, caught in a double bind, too calm to be believed, too composed to be pitied. And in the world of high-stakes interviews, where emotion is currency, she wasn't spending enough. Viewers didn't know whether to respect her discipline or mistrust her detachment. The contradictions of the OPRAH appearance became the center of discussion for weeks. On one hand, some saw it as a portrait of frozen grief, an emotional paralysis brought on by trauma too deep to express. They said Kate's silence, her lack of tears, her stillness in the face of her daughter's image, were exactly what real trauma looks like, not dramatic, not cinematic, but numb. Others disagreed completely. They called it rehearsed, hollow, performative. "She's not grieving," one viewer wrote online. "She's auditioning." The debate wasn't about facts. It was about presentation. Kate's posture, her tone. The absence of a breakdown. Everything was interpreted through the lens of belief. If you trusted her, you saw restraint. If you didn't, you saw deception. The phrase, frozen grief, became a kind of justification. But critics countered with a colder term, emotional opacity. They argued that real suffering has texture, unpredictability, moments of raw vulnerability. What they saw on OPRAH, they claimed, was a woman who had learned what to say, and exactly how to say it. The question wasn't whether she was lying, it was whether she was feeling. Online, the reaction to Kate's OPRAH appearance split down familiar lines. Supporters flooded comment sections with praise. "She's so strong. I can't believe she's held it together this long. She gives me hope." For them, Kate was the embodiment of endurance, a mother who had been vilified, blamed, dissected, and still carried on. But critics were louder and sharper. YouTube clips were slowed down, picked apart frame by frame. Reddit threads filled with screenshots of Kate's face during the age. Progression reveal. No emotion. Flat effect. Dead eyes. Her silence was interpreted as indifference. Her calm as calculation. Even her wardrobe, muted tones, soft makeup, was analyzed as part of a strategy. Some believed she was coached. Others said she didn't need coaching, that this was her natural state. Cold. Detached. Hidden. The OPRAH interview, intended to humanize her, did the opposite for many. It gave viewers more footage to study, more moments to doubt, more reasons to choose a side. Kate McCann had crossed the ocean to tell her story, but in doing so, she gave America another lens to question it. By 2010, public attention toward the McCann case had dimmed, but not disappeared. What remained wasn't momentum, but murmurs. Small details, once overlooked, now resurfaced through leaks and private files. Among them was the issue of the curtain in the children's bedroom. In initial statements, Kate had described it, fluttering, when she entered. Later versions changed to blowing wildly, then billowing into the room, each version slightly different. Why did the curtain matter? Because it implied an open window, and that window, central to the abduction theory, had no signs of tampering. Then came the mystery couple. One witness claimed to have seen a man and woman carrying a child in PRAIA lose the night Madeleine vanished. A potential lead, maybe, but descriptions were vague. The couple was never found. The sighting was never verified. And yet, years later, the McCanns referenced the same couple again, this time in interviews. Was it memory or narrative? Was the couple real? Or a detail picked up and folded into their account? These fragments weren't enough to move the case forward. But they were enough to keep people from letting it go. Because in the absence of hard evidence, all that remained was inconsistency. Throughout the case, one accusation has lingered in the background, never proven, never charged, but impossible to ignore. Sedation. The theory that Madeleine, and possibly her siblings, had been given sleeping medication to ensure a quiet night. Fueling this suspicion was Kate's profession. She was a medical doctor, specifically, a GP. She had access. She had knowledge. In the original interviews, some statements suggested that the children were hard to wake, that they slept through the commotion, that they didn't stir even as police moved through the apartment. Supporters called it trauma-induced sleep. Critics called it unnatural. Portuguese police reportedly considered the possibility of accidental overdose early in the investigation, but found no direct evidence. Still, the idea stuck. Not just because of Kate's background, but because of behavior. She never denied sedation directly. When asked, her answers were deflective, technical, not emotional. She said they followed routine, that nothing unusual had been done. But that wasn't a no. And for many, especially online investigators and armchair analysts, the absence of a clear denial was treated as implication. No charges were filed. No proof was offered. But in the court of public opinion, silence once again whispered louder than fact. One of the most persistent physical controversies in the case is the Renault Scenic, the rental car the McCanns acquired 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. British sniffer dogs brought to Portugal alerted to the scent of blood and cadavers in the trunk. This alone didn't prove anything. But forensic teams took samples. The initial lab reports indicated bodily fluid, consistent with a DNA profile that could not be excluded as Madeleine's. The phrasing was cautious. Not a match, not a denial, just inconclusive. Later reports walked back the result, citing contamination and sample degradation. But the story was already out. Why would there be any trace linked to Madeleine in a car rented nearly a month after she vanished? The McCanns argued that items from the apartment had been transported in the vehicle. Toys, clothing, perhaps even cross-contamination from police evidence bags. But skeptics found that explanation weak. Kate's own comment at the time didn't help. When told about the blood detection, she reportedly replied, "When did you say the car was hired?" A simple question. But to critics, it sounded more like damage control. No charges came from the car. But the stain on their public image didn't fade. The scientific evidence against the McCanns was always shaky. No fingerprints, no weapon, no body, and critically, no confirmed DNA match to Madeleine. Not in the apartment, and not in the car. This lack of proof became their strongest shield. The Portuguese Attorney General closed the case in 2008 citing insufficient evidence. Yet doubts remained. Because the absence of DNA didn't explain the dog's reactions. It didn't explain the inconsistencies in statements. It didn't explain why two trained canines had alerted independently to the same locations. Behind the sofa, inside the car, near Kate's clothing. When pressed in interviews, the McCanns downplayed the dogs, calling them unreliable. They pointed to cases where canine evidence had failed. But critics pointed to other cases where it hadn't. Once again, the facts were inconclusive, but the optics were damaging. A child goes missing. The mother refuses to answer key questions. The dogs react. The science walks it back. But the image stays. Years passed. The case went cold. But online, in forums and documentaries, people weren't debating what was found. They were debating what wasn't. No evidence is not the same as innocence. The phrase became something of a mantra among those who remained skeptical of Kate McCann. It's not a legal standard. It's a cultural one. And in high-profile cases, perception often carries more weight than proof. The McCanns were never charged. But they were never truly exonerated in the public eye. Supporters pointed to the failure of the police, the media frenzy, the political interference. But detractors pointed to behavior, silence, precision, the refusal to answer 48 questions, the lack of visible grief, the contradictions about the window, the changing curtain descriptions, the car, the dogs. None of these elements were, in isolation, damning. But together, they painted a picture that felt incomplete. Too clean, too curated. Kate McCann, in her book and interviews, insisted she had nothing to hide. But hiding is not always a matter of fact. It's a matter of feeling. And many people felt something was missing. Something unsaid. Something just outside the reach of hard evidence. But too large to ignore. The trail was fading. But the questions were getting clearer. In 2017, as the 10-year anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance approached, Kate McCann stepped once again into the media spotlight. She appeared on BBC and Sky News, calmer, older, but no less resolute. Her words were careful, but not rehearsed. "I still buy her birthday presents," she said. "I still put up decorations. We still hope." The anchors leaned in. Cameras lingered. For some, it was a heartbreaking image. A mother clinging to memory, refusing to surrender to despair. For others, it felt too familiar. The soft, spoken voice, the unwavering message, the visible control, hope, had become a recurring theme, and Kate repeated it often. Hope keeps us going. But what that hope masked, or revealed, was open to interpretation. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply recited what had become her refrain: "Madeleine is still out there." The interviews were emotionally loaded but visually restrained. She spoke of time passing, of questions unanswered, of grief suspended. Yet, after a decade, the rawness some expected had hardened into something else. Not closure, not breakdown, but composure. And for a case that thrived on what could not be explained, that composure still made many uncomfortable. During those interviews, Kate made a rare admission. One she had long avoided. She spoke of guilt. Not guilt of wrongdoing, but guilt of absence. "Of course I feel guilt," she said. "I left her. That will never go away." But she followed quickly. "We didn't do anything wrong. Not intentionally." The phrasing mattered. Not intentionally, a phrase of legal distance. An acknowledgement of consequence without assumption of blame. She said it quietly and once again, without tears. The words hung between empathy and defense. For some, it was the closest thing to vulnerability they'd seen. For others, it was a calculated balance. Guilt without confession. Regret without ownership. Kate's tone didn't shake. Her eyes didn't flinch. She sounded reflective, but measured. And that measure, after 10 years, still raised eyebrows. Supporters saw a woman who had lived under a microscope and survived. Critics saw someone too aware of the script. Her guilt was real. But was it emotional or performative? That one sentence, "not intentionally," echoed beyond the interview. It wasn't just an admission. It was a line drawn carefully in the sand between mother and myth. In a rare moment of informal candor, Kate appeared on LAD Bible, a platform not known for serious journalism. The setting was relaxed. The tone was conversational. It was meant to humanize, and for a brief moment, it did. She admitted what few expected to hear. "I've thought about giving up," she said. "Of letting go. But I can't." Her voice, usually composed, faltered slightly. It was not a breakdown, but a tremor. She spoke of exhaustion, of reliving the moment every night, of how the house still carries Madeleine's presence. Kate described the burden not just of loss, but of public perception. "People think they know what happened," she said. "They don't." The interview was short, but revealing. Not for what was said, but for what wasn't. Viewers were left wondering, did this more casual format show the real Kate, or just another controlled variation? For some, it was the first time she sounded like a mother in mourning. For others, it was more of the same, grief in quotation marks. A glimpse behind the curtain, but not enough to see what's truly there. Online, the 10-year anniversary reignited old fires. The BBC and LAD Bible clips circulated rapidly. Forums exploded. Comments ranged from compassion to condemnation. "She looks tired," one user wrote. "You can see the pain." Another countered. "She's acting again. Same blank face." The same debate played out in loops. Some praised her strength. Others questioned her timing. Critics noted how neatly the anniversary interviews aligned with renewed funding for the investigation. Was it coincidence or strategy? Kate's lack of emotion was still the focal point. No tears in 10 years. Someone tweeted. Just press statements. Supporters were quick to defend. Some pain is too deep for display. But that logic, too, felt circular. If she cried, it would be theater. If she didn't, it was concealment. The McCanns had become, unwillingly or not, public property. Every word, every blink, every breath dissected. And after 10 years, the gap between empathy and suspicion hadn't narrowed. It had calcified. Kate had stepped forward to remind the world of her daughter. But once again, the world turned its gaze on her instead. A decade after the disappearance, the McCann case was no longer just a tragedy. It had become a narrative, repeated, revised, reinterpreted. Kate stood at its center. Her image had been weaponized by both sides. To some, she was the mother who never gave up. To others, she was the face of something too polished, too curated, too consistent to trust. When she appeared on screen, she brought not just grief, but performance. In true crime culture, there's a thin line between victim and suspect, between truth and storytelling. And by 2017, Kate McCann walked that line with every syllable. Her silence had once sparked suspicion. Now, even her words did. Her hope, her guilt, her persistence. Each became evidence in an unwinnable trial of public opinion. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She had become the story, and every time she stepped back into the light, people asked again, not, "Where is Madeleine?" but, "Who is Kate really? A mother in pain? Or the author of something much more complex?" It was the question no one had dared to ask on television. Until Piers Morgan. In a special edition of Uncensored, broadcast globally, he looked directly at Kate McCann and said, without blinking, "You left your children alone, didn't you? You abandoned them." The tone was sharp. The studio fell into a silence heavy with anticipation. Kate didn't look surprised. She had heard the accusation before, but never so publicly, so directly, and from someone who wouldn't flinch. Morgan didn't soften the edges. He listed the facts. 3 toddlers unsupervised, night after night, while their parents dined 50 meters away. "Some say that's criminal," he added. "What do you say to them?" The camera zoomed in. Not on Piers, but on Kate's eyes. Her fingers tightened slightly. Her breath caught, but only for a second. It was a line many thought had been crossed. Others argued it was long overdue. For the first time in years, the discussion wasn't framed by sympathy. It was framed by accountability. Morgan wasn't cruel. He was relentless, and that relentlessness exposed not just the facts, but the tension Kate had managed to hold beneath the surface for 17 years. Until now. Her response came slowly, deliberately. "We did what we thought was best at the time," Kate said. Her voice didn't tremble. Her words didn't wander. "We were checking on them every 20-30 minutes. It felt safe. We weren't neglectful. We weren't careless. We were trying to live." It wasn't a confession. It was a justification. A defense cloaked in regret. Kate repeated that they were good parents, that they had never imagined something like this could happen. "People will always judge," she said. "But no one judges me more than I already do." The sentence lingered, calculated for both truth and impact. Morgan nodded slightly, but didn't ease up. "Do you think Madeleine would still be here if you'd stayed home that night?" Again, a pause. Kate didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply said, "I ask myself that every day." The exchange was painful, but controlled. No emotional collapse. No flares of anger. Just a slow unraveling of grief through the filter of restraint. For some, her answers were honest. For others, they were polished, scripted, safe. But in those few minutes, something cracked. Not a confession. Not a slip. But the illusion that time had healed everything. Throughout the interview, Kate remained physically composed, but her body told a second story. Experts who later reviewed the footage noted several subtle shifts, a tightness in the jaw, a soft downward glance when Morgan pressed hardest, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the word bandiment was used, she blinked faster than normal, one of the few involuntary responses during the segment. Her shoulders stayed square, her posture rigid. But it wasn't comfort, it was armor. A psychological wall held up by 17 years of surviving public scrutiny. Her voice never rose. Her volume never cracked. But her tone flattened. Some called it emotional suppression. Others called it media training. The most telling moment came when Morgan asked her why she never speaks with visible emotion. Her answer, because if I start crying, I might never stop. It was a powerful sentence. One that could silence critics, or feed them. Was it honest? Possibly. Was it rehearsed? Maybe. But what mattered wasn't the words. It was the control. The effort behind every syllable. Kate's body didn't betray her. But it didn't comfort anyone either. As the interview aired, social media lit up with polar reactions. Some viewers praised Morgan's courage, calling it the interrogation we've waited 17 years for. Others accused him of cruelty, of re-traumatizing a mother who had already endured the worst loss imaginable. Kate, too, drew polarized responses. To her defenders, she was dignified under fire. Her responses were poised, reflective, painful. She's been through hell, one user wrote, and she still speaks with grace. But critics weren't moved. She had no real answers. Same lines, same distance. The interview didn't shift the narrative, it fractured it further. In the eyes of some, Kate became more human. In others, more suspicious. What had begun as a search for accountability had morphed, once again, into a referendum on Kate McCann's emotional expression. After 17 years, the case hadn't gone cold. It had gone cyclical. Grief, silence, appearances, division. And now, Morgan's interview became just another battle in a war no one could win. And so came the final question, one Morgan delivered not as an attack, but as a challenge. When you look back, he said, do you believe your reactions were those of a mother, or of someone trying to survive as a suspect? The pause was long. Longer than any before. Kate's eyes narrowed slightly. She exhaled. I was a mother, she replied. I am a mother. And everything I've done since that night has been for her. It was the most emotionally charged line of the night. It didn't answer the question. It reframed it. The distinction between instinct and image had blurred long ago. And Kate McCann, still standing. Was her restraint the mark of trauma, or of guilt? Was her composure her only defense, or her biggest tell? After nearly 2 decades, we still don't know. But one thing is certain, when the cameras stop and the lights go down, the only person left in that silence is her. In June 2020, German prosecutors made a startling announcement. They had a new prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. His name was Christian Bruckner, a 43-year-old convicted offender with a long history of crimes against children. He had lived in a camper van near PRAIA da Luz in 2007 and, crucially, was confirmed to have been in the area at the time Madeleine vanished. Phone records placed him in close proximity to the Ocean Club that night. His criminal history was brutal. He was already behind bars in Germany for unrelated crimes. But what tied him to Madeleine's case wasn't just location, it was behavior, a history of lurking, of violence, of silence. Investigators claimed he had made disturbing remarks about children who disappear and are never found. The circumstantial evidence was chilling, but thin. No physical link to Madeleine had been found. No DNA, no confession. Still, authorities in Germany were confident. We are sure she is dead, the prosecutor said, and we are sure he did it. It was the strongest statement made in years. And for the first time, the spotlight shifted, if only slightly, away from the McCanns. When the news of Bruckner broke, the McCanns issued a carefully worded statement. They thanked the police. They expressed hope. And their tone was subtly lighter. For the first time in over a decade, someone else was being named. Jerry and Kate appeared relieved. Not jubilant, not vindicated, but finally free from sole suspicion. Yet the internet wasn't ready to let go. On forums, the shift felt forced. Convenient, isn't it? One user wrote. Right when the case goes cold, they find a scapegoat. Others demanded to know why it took 13 years to identify someone with such an obvious criminal background. The McCann's relief became, paradoxically, suspicious. Kate in particular was scrutinized again, her reaction too calm, her words too measured. The idea that Bruckner might be guilty didn't erase old doubts. If anything, it reignited them. Even if he did it, one commenter posted, doesn't mean she didn't know something. For every article about Bruckner, there were a dozen threads pulling Kate's past statements back into focus. A new suspect had emerged. But an old story remained. People still couldn't decide what to believe about the mother. As the German investigation dragged on, a growing segment of the public remained unconvinced, not about Bruckner's guilt, but about Kate McCann's innocence. For them, it wasn't a question of either or, it was both. They believed Bruckner might be involved, but Kate knew more than she ever said. This belief wasn't rooted in new evidence. It was anchored in old behavior. The silence during interrogation. The inconsistent statements. The lack of emotion. These weren't facts, they were impressions. But in a case built on absence, impressions mattered. The introduction of Bruckner didn't exonerate Kate. It complicated her. She looks more relaxed now. Some noted. Because she knows it's over. Others saw it the opposite way. She knows he'll never talk. The public's relationship with Kate had become symbolic. She represented more than a mother. She was a vessel for doubt, for unresolved anger, for the discomfort of not knowing. A suspect had finally been named. But for many, the mystery of Kate was still unsolved. And the more time passed, the more it felt like she had become a permanent part of that mystery, whether she deserved to be or not. The case of Madeleine McCann is no longer just a crime. It is a cultural mirror. And what it reflects, most clearly, is our discomfort with ambiguity. We crave resolution. When we don't get it, we assign blame. Kate McCann became the placeholder for that discomfort. She didn't scream, she didn't shatter, she didn't weep on cue. And so, we filled the silence with suspicion. When Bruckner was named, it should have been closure. But instead, it raised a different kind of anxiety. If he really did it, why does it still feel incomplete? Because we want a story with clear heroes and villains. But real life rarely offers that. Kate remains an enigma, not because of what she did, but because of how she didn't act. Bruckner may be the criminal, but Kate became the symbol of unresolved grief. And in the world of true crime, symbols are more powerful than suspects. We hate not knowing. One psychologist noted, so we create meaning, even if it hurts someone. Perhaps Bruckner will be tried. Perhaps he will be convicted. But whether guilty or not, he may never erase the shadow that's followed Kate for nearly 2 decades. 18 years have passed. The world has moved on, from wars, elections, pandemics. But for Kate McCann, time never resumed. She didn't return to medicine. The profession that once defined her became part of a past too painful to reclaim. Instead, she faded from public life. She works with missing persons charities, quietly, behind the scenes. No press releases. No cameras. Her days, by all accounts, are ordinary. School runs for the twins, grocery shopping, late walks with a dog. But in every routine, there's a shadow. A child who never returned. A question that never settled. Kate no longer grants interviews. She declined invitations to documentaries. She does not attend vigils. But she still lights a candle on May 3rd. She still buys presents. She still believes, or says she does. Friends describe her as kind, private, guarded. They say she smiles less, but listens more. She's not the woman she was. How could she be? Some call this grace. Others call it retreat. But perhaps it's survival. A quiet life, not one of peace, but of managed silence. No career comeback. No public platform. Just the residue of something that will never fully disappear. Online, the case still breathes. Not daily, but cyclically. Every anniversary, every legal update, every suspect, a new wave of hashtags appears. Supporters post tributes, candle emojis, photos of Madeleine smiling in a pink hat. But the critics haven't gone away. They've evolved. They've archived every interview. They've cataloged every contradiction. For every sympathetic article, there's a thread tearing it apart. In an age of endless content, nothing disappears. Especially not suspicion. Especially not when it's tied to a mother. There are blogs still analyzing her OPRAH interview. YouTube videos with millions of views dissecting her body language. Reddit threads resurrecting old police files. Even podcasts built entirely around one question: what really happened? Some call it obsession. Others call it justice. Either way, it keeps her frozen, not just as Kate McCann, but as an eternal maybe, no longer accused, but never cleared, not legally, emotionally, symbolically, publicly. And in the world of true crime, symbols endure far longer than facts. But beyond social media, one question remains: if she's innocent, why can't we forget her? Why doesn't the story end? It's not because of new evidence. There isn't any. It's not because of the police. They've moved on. It's something deeper. Psychological, cultural, a discomfort with her lack of breakdown. Her refusal to grieve the way we expect. In her silence, we projected meaning. In her control, we saw conspiracy. And in every appearance, too smooth, too careful, too consistent, we imagined rehearsal. Even if she told the truth, it didn't feel like truth. That's the paradox of public perception. She wasn't just judged by what she said, but by how she didn't say more. Some argue she was a victim twice, first of a crime, then of suspicion. Others say she constructed her image too carefully to trust. And so, the question circles endlessly: if you didn't do anything wrong, why does it still feel wrong? Why do people still hesitate to defend you? And if innocence doesn't bring peace, then what does? Kate McCann is not on trial. She never was. Not in court. But in the digital age, public trials never needed courtrooms. Platforms became pulpits. Algorithms became amplifiers. Every pause, every phrase, every dry-eyed interview became evidence. For some, her restraint proved guilt. For others, it proved strength. But either way, the court of public opinion doesn't adjourn. And the internet never forgets. We live in a culture obsessed with clarity. We want villains and victims. When we don't get them, we make them. We don't allow uncertainty to stand. Kate became the face of uncertainty, and faces demand narratives. So we chose one, or built our own. Justice is supposed to be blind. But online, it's crowded, emotional, and permanent. And for Kate McCann, that has meant an unending sentence, not of prison, but of projection. She lives with questions that no judge will ever ask. She answers to strangers she'll never meet. And though the case remains open, her place in the story has already been set. Not by facts, but by feeling. So now, 18 years later, we're left not with evidence, but with questions. If you were her, would you have stayed silent? If your child vanished and the world turned on you, would you still speak? Would you still hope? Would you still breathe? And if you were watching from the outside, if you had never lost a child, would you be able to tell the difference between self-control and guilt? Between trauma and theater? Between a victim and a suspect? And most haunting of all, if the truth does come out, if the impossible is finally proven, will you be ready to believe it? Or is the version of Kate McCann we've built already too familiar to let go? And so, 18 years later, we are left not with closure, but with questions. Kate McCann remains a woman both known and unknowable, living not in innocence or guilt, but in that suspended space in between. Her silence, her control, her presence, none of them resolve the mystery, but they keep it alive. And just when the story seems to settle, something pulls it back into motion. Not new evidence, just the weight of doubt that never quite leaves. The story now belongs to the public. And with it, 3 theories remain. The first, an accident covered in silence. That something happened in the apartment, perhaps sedation, perhaps neglect, and the parents, in panic or fear, hid the truth. The behavior fits, the dogs. The DNA whispers, the missing minutes. But no proof. The second, a true abduction, clean and silent. A predator slipping in and out unnoticed. There are witness accounts, timelines, possibilities, but no forced entry, no trace left behind. Nothing but a window and a story. The third, a staged disappearance, carefully constructed, meticulously managed. The words too precise. The grief too still. The narrative too rehearsed. It is the theory many believe, not because it's proven, but because it feels complete. Because it explains what emotion does not. And maybe that's what this case was always about. Not facts, but feeling. Not guilt or innocence, but how we interpret silence, restraint, and pain. Maybe we wanted Kate to cry more. Or less. Maybe we wanted her to break. But she didn't. And for that, some never forgave her. Now, the story ends where it began, in the dark. And the light, if it ever comes, will not bring comfort. Only clarity. So we ask you, if you were her, would you have spoken sooner? If you were the one who lost a child, would your face look different? And if one day the truth is revealed, will you be ready to believe it? Because some truths don't scream. They sit quietly and wait.